Hello, and welcome to Sierra Club's Diverse Perspectives in the Outdoors Media Livestream panel. My name is Chris Hill, and I am the Senior Director of the Our Wild America campaign here at Sierra Club. I'll be moderating this panel as we hear from some outdoor enthusiasts and learn more about their incredible creative projects and initiatives. I'm currently based out of Haines, Alaska, which is home to the Tlingit people on the beautiful Chilkat River, and I use she and her pronouns. We have a great lineup today, and I'm really excited to jump right on in and talk about the creators we have featuring. We'll be taking some live questions, so definitely drop your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll try our best to get to them towards the end of the panel. So let's jump right in. In this virtual panel, we are bringing together Kristen Walker and Diamond Clark with Our Parks 2, which is a multimedia initiative launched this year to showcase Black joy and inclusivity in the outdoors. We also have Willow Belden, who's with Out There, which is a podcast that explores big questions through intimate stories about the outdoors. Their projects are very different in medium and topic, but linked through a similar desire to really explore diversity in the outdoors through sharing personal stories. So to start off, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Kristen. Tell us a bit about yourself and about your project.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our live stream. My name is Kristen Walker, a native of Baltimore, Maryland, and I currently still live here. So our project, Our Parks 2, was started out of our desire to see more people like us experiencing the national park system. I am also a full-time biologist and a PhD student. So in my spare time, Diamond and I are exploring the outdoors.
Great, thank you. And that's a great segue for us to hear from Diamond and her part in the Our Parks 2 work.
Hi, everybody. My name is Diamond. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also from Baltimore City and the co-founder of Our Parks 2. Outside of the project, I am a full-time environmental educator. I am a Maryland Master Naturalist and an avid traveler. My mission is to promote environmental literacy in the Black community. So being a part of the Our Parks 2 project is my additional avenue to share the things that I know and what's happening in nature.
Great. Thank you all so much. And for those who haven't seen their work, we're going to watch the first episode of Our Parks 2 just to get a little taste.
Good morning. Today we're visiting our first park, which is New River Gorge National Park, the newest named national park in the system. Today we're going to hit up a couple of trails and we're excited about it.
Oh, and we got our first stamp in our passport.
Yeah.
There are two main features of the park, and one of them is the New River Gorge Bridge.
So yesterday, Kristen and I had the privilege to do the bridge walk, where we were able to walk a catwalk beneath the bridge, the entire length of it, and it was incredible. So we have already done one trail. Kmore Trail, gorgeous. Waterfalls. Wow, this is incredible. Just a random waterfall in the middle of the trail. It's gorgeous. This trail has been pleasantly so diverse in its ecosystems. We've gone from very open area to an area that was thick with beautiful lush hemlocks, and it's so thick that like you can't really see anything but the trail itself. We have made it to the end of Long Point Trail. Woo! And it ends at this beautiful overlook where you can see the New River Bridge as well as the New River, and there it is right there.
Awesome. That was so wonderful. I want to join some park visits with y'all as a fellow Marylander. Okay, so y'all remember to share questions for our guests in the chat, please. And now we're going to move to Willow. I'd love to hear about you and your podcast out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Willow Belden. I'm based in Laramie, Wyoming, and I am the host and founder of Out There, which is an award-winning podcast where we use outdoor stories to sort of help you make sense out of your life and in your world. And it's a little different than most other outdoor podcasts for a couple of reasons. One, we focus on narratives, so it's really tightly woven stories rather than just interviews. And secondly, we really try to explore bigger questions with our stories. So it's not just about adventure, but it's really about how experiences in the outdoors change people and what they learn and what they take away from it and what we can learn about ourselves and our place in the world. And one of my big priorities with the show is to really make space for voices that are often sidelined in traditional outdoor media. So we've made a big push for that over the years.
Cool. Thanks, Willow. And we have a clip from the Out There podcast to share with y'all as well for folks who haven't listened before.
Outdoor stories that use nature to help you make sense out of life. And now we're excited to bring you a new season. The theme for the season is Secrets of the Earth. Each episode, we're sharing a story about something that happened outdoors that uncovered new truths. The stories are all introspective personal narratives, just like you know and love, and they all harness the power of nature to give us a fresh look at our own humanity.
I felt like I was on fire. It was like someone had plugged me into an electric socket. It was this incredible high, and I just stood on the dock.
I was so aware of being back in that zone of joy, being aware that you love this.
Was the weirdest thing of like this sense and feeling of serenity, this sense and feeling that like everything is going to be okay.
Join us this season as we explore the natural world in order to better understand ourselves. Together, we'll get lost in the desert, we'll wander the beach, and we'll find our way home in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The season runs April 20th through July 13th, 2023. Follow Out There wherever you get your podcasts or at outtherepodcast.com.
Willow, I'm adding that to my podcast list right now. Thank you all for sharing those. So now that we have a better idea of the sort of work that you three do, let's roll right into some questions. So our Parks 2 and Out There both share this goal of exploring diversity in the outdoors through sharing personal stories. So my question is, how do stories help people feel like they belong in the outdoors? What does that look like to y'all? And you can popcorn whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. I think it's important. So historically, national park visitors are like less than 2% African American. So I think it's important to show that we can also enjoy these places. We can access these places to be kind of like a role model for people who thought that people like us shouldn't or couldn't be in these places. So I think it's really cool for folks who subscribe to our Instagram or, check out our webpage or see us on the Sierra Club website to know that people who look like them can enjoy these things. It's not for only one facet of America. Like all of these experiences are available to everyone.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Kristen said, I think there's this, when I began my journey in this industry with camping and backpacking and learning about ecology, my friends and family were very confused about what I was doing. And it was more so seen as something for them, for white people, not Black people. And so out of the gate, there's this psychological barrier that Black people have to wanting to go outside. And then when you layer on the historic context of how Black people have been treated outside as enslaved people and through Jim Crow, there is this generational trauma that's been perpetuated through generations until now. And so by centering Black stories in our project is an opportunity to highlight, the greatness that Black people have contributed to nature, and where there isn't so much Black history, that's where Kristen and I are forging our own path and sharing our stories in these spaces to encourage more people that look like us to want to get outside.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I mean, it's, you hear this all the time that representation matters, and representation does matter, because if you don't see yourself in the stories that are told, then you don't feel like you belong there. I think one of the things that I've thought a lot about over the years as I've been working on Out There as well is that I think it's really important to do stories that I sort of like to call them happens to be stories, where the story might be about a person of color, but it's not about victimization, or it's not about feeling like you don't belong. Obviously, those are important themes to unpack and explore as well. But I think there's a real need to have stories where you just see someone from one of these communities who's just doing things and is out and is out hiking, and it's not about like, oh, I don't belong here. It's about something else they're going through. It's about them navigating their relationship with somebody, or them navigating parenthood or whatever, so that it's not just all about like, oh, if I go out here, it's all negative. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Willow, you deliberately make space for people to tell their own stories in their own voice. Why is that approach? Why is that the approach you chose to go with?
Yeah, so just to give you a little background about sort of how I've structured Out There. I will sometimes do stories of my own, but more often, most of our stories are produced by freelance producers and writers from all over the country and all over the world, actually. And so they're telling their stories in their own words, their first person narratives, and I'm involved in the editing process, but it's really like I'm letting them take the reins on the story. And I think that's really important. I mean, this is by design, because I think so often we as journalists have the power to pick what we focus on and how we shape a story and what we decide is important. And there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a place for that, and this is like, that's good to do too. But what happens is that then, like, if I'm interviewing people and telling their story in my words, it's always got my spin on it, and it's always told through my lens and my lived experiences of like, well, here's what I think is interesting about this, and here's what speaks to me about this, and that's fine. But that's not necessarily what speaks to everyone else. And so if you're coming at this with a background that is different than mine and a lived experience that is different than mine, you're probably going to get more out of it if somebody else can tell their own story in their own words. And so I think it's, I have worked really hard to make space for that to, and to make that happen. And it usually means it's actually a lot more work on my part, because I'm helping other people. I'm sort of like midwifing the stories and helping other people, tell really deeply personal stories that they may not have told in that way before. So it's a ton of work. But it's so fulfilling. And I often hear feedback from the people who contribute stories to us where they're like, I really just appreciated being able to having a platform to tell this story in my own words and not having to sort of cede control over it to someone else. So I mean, I think that's important in actually centering, other voices and perspectives that are different than mine, as opposed to just saying that I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Kristen and Diamond, you all are centering the Black experience and lifting up Black joy and what that looks like in the outdoors. And Diamond, you talked a little bit about this, but what really drove that desire for y'all to do this project?
It started for me. I was a member of the environmental leadership cohort with a DC-based organization called Soul Trek Outdoors. And we took 2 national park trips, one to Virgin Islands National Park, and then another trip to Utah to visit Canyonlands and Arches National Park. And so while we were in Utah, I just noticed that there were no other Black people on the plane. There were no other Black people on the trails. And then while we were in the Virgin Islands National Park, we actually volunteered and did a service project while we were there. So the project that we did was they actually had us clearing archaeological ruins, but the archaeological ruins were like former slave plantations. And I thought, this seems to be a little bit out of touch. Like, why would you have us volunteer to come here and clean like slave plantations? So I just thought it was like really interesting, something to remark upon, and that we need to be more present in these spaces to kind of help to shape narratives about who should be in these places, what we should be doing to like help steward these places. And then I just came up with the idea to visit all the parks and, show people that we can do this and we can be there and enjoy ourselves. Diamond?
My personal entryway into advocating for more diversity in the outdoors started when I was in college. I have a degree in environmental science. I was the only Black person in my program. And when I graduated, I was the first person of color to earn the degree from the university, period. And so at the time, I just accepted that this was the reality. When I went to conferences, when I went to professional spaces, I knew that I was likely going to be the only. And it wasn't until I came across this article about the stark lack of diversity in environmental leadership in particular that my gears started to turn, and I became more intentional about how I wanted to show up and position myself in my career as an educator. So it took some time, but now as a freelance educator, I prioritize creating programs and writing curriculum that center Black people. I work primarily with Black-owned organizations. Most of them are also Black women-owned organizations. And so my whole goal, as I mentioned before, is to increase environmental literacy, because I feel like that is how we deepen our relationship with nature as we are coming into a space and, enjoying it for the pleasantries, but also learning about, the ecology that's happening around us. That's how we then progress from, recreationists to stewards. And that's ultimately where I hope to shepherd my community towards, this is stewardship. And so when Kristen came to me with this project idea, I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer for me to hop in on, because this is another platform that I can use to further my mission for teaching people about the environment from a scientist's perspective, as well as, a Black girl from the city.
Awesome. So I want to pivot to talking a little bit about the mediums that y'all use. So what drew all of you to the mediums that you chose, whether that's video and social media for you, Kristen and Diamond, or podcasts for you, Willow? Like, why did you all pick those mediums to showcase the work?
I can start. So I come to this from a public radio background. Before I started podcasting, I used to be a reporter and host at Wyoming Public Radio, which is the NPR station out here. And I've always loved audio, and I've always felt like it's a very personal and intimate and honest medium. Especially with podcasts. I mean, you people are usually listening through headphones, and it's like you sort of become their friend. And so I love that about it. And and I mean, you know, video is wonderful too. I think it's easier to tell stories about things that happened in the past, which is what a lot of our stories do. If you're not like having to have images of it. But yeah, I don't know. I've always loved audio, and I've always loved how intimate and honest it is, and how much personality you can get. I mean, one of the things that I always notice when we're editing scripts is that if you look at a podcast script, and you look at like the transcriptions of the sound bites we're using, they look like such a mess. Like they look terrible. And it's like they're full of ums and uhs, and like people starting sentences and then stopping and going back and like saying things differently. And it looks terrible on paper. Like you would never print that. But when you hear it, and when you hear the emotion in someone's voice, and you hear the honesty in the feelings that they're describing, it resonates in a way that I think is very relatable to people, and that people connect with on a very visceral level.
I'll go next. Actually, I think it's funny. Okay, so yesterday, me and Diamond met with a photographer, and we were having a conversation about like, oh, like it would be wonderful to be a photojournalist. And I'm just realizing now that, are we photojournalists? Like we've been doing this for a couple months now, and I guess we are photo and video journalists. But I had never thought about that in that way. So I have actually never made any kind of video media for production. Before starting Our Parks 2, I had never had my voice in a video on Instagram, on YouTube, like ever. So I was terrified to like have our first videos posted. But so that's why, another reason why Diamond was essential in this partnership, because she had already been a content creator for her own brand, already covering her own adventures. So I was like, wow, there's no other like perfect person to do this for me, to be able to like help me showcase our adventures to the public. So I'm kind of like an older millennial, and I wasn't familiar with this medium, but like as we're working together more and more, I'm becoming more comfortable, and I think it's like the perfect avenue for us.
And she's crushing it. Kristen is killing the game. Okay. So my journey with content. So, okay, it's 2023. The kids are on social media. That's how we get our news. That's how we know what's happening in the world. So it only makes sense that we show up in the video format. And I initially started showing up on social media as like, you know, the Diamond Does persona that is outside during the height of the pandemic, when I couldn't reach my students and I was feeling antsy. So I decided to start just recording myself doing the things that I felt good doing. And at the time, as we were coming out of shutdown, I decided I wanted to rent a camper van and live in it for a month and road trip from Colorado to California. And I recorded the whole thing, and I posted like little snips of it on Instagram. And the light went off that, oh, duh, Diamond, like this is a platform that you can use to show up as an educator when you don't have access to your people in the regular way. So that was how I began, and it's evolved into such different ways. And I've gone on so many adventures and recorded so much of it that's never seen the light of day, to be honest. But it's been good practice for Our Parks 2. And now that we're doing it and actually posting it, it's really fun to see how my skills have, come a little bit of a way.
That's awesome. That's really cool, y'all. And for folks who are listening, don't forget to add in questions or comments for our panelists as we move into some of the audience questions. So, Willow, you've been doing this for a while, and what does it look like to create that content and create and generate the ideas for your podcast?
Yeah. So like I said, I think I go about this a slightly different way than a lot of podcasters. And that is, again, because so many of our stories are done by outside people. So usually the way it works for us is my team and I will come up with an idea for a season. And so, just like TV shows have seasons, we've got seasons. And so we'll decide, all right, this is a theme we're going to focus on for this coming season. And then we put out a call for pitches, and we invite people to pitch us stories. And we kind of say, this is what we're looking for in general. What do you got? What do you want to do? And so audio producers and writers will come forward and say, here's my story idea. This is what I'm envisioning. And we kind of pick the ones that we think are going to be the best fit and that are going to make really dynamic, interesting stories. And then I work with all of those producers to develop the stories. And this is a process that takes months. Most of our seasons take at least 6 or 7 months to put together. And then, you end up with 7 or 8 episodes. So it's very labor intensive. I think a lot of people are surprised when I think there's this perception that with a podcast, you just kind of talk into a microphone and there it is. And, that is sometimes true, but not for this show. And so we often will go through, we'll talk about, well, how do we want to structure this story? What is the story really about? Okay, so maybe it's about a backpacking trip, but what's it really about? Is it really about, maybe it's really about, okay, at what point is it good to do something selfish, something just for you? Maybe that's really what the story is about. And so then we talk about, okay, how are we going to structure the story so that we really dive into that question and come up with an answer for listeners. And we usually go through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 drafts of a script before any narration gets recorded. It's a pretty intensive process. And that's before we even start with sound design, mixing in music and mixing in sound effects and all of that. So like I said, it's a labor intensive process, but it's also really fun. And I love the collaborative aspect of it. I love working with people and helping them tell a story that they've sort of had, bubbling inside of them a little bit, but that they didn't maybe quite know how to bring out and bring into the world. That's so fulfilling.
I can imagine it's labor intensive and it's a lot of work. And I can also imagine, Diamond, with the work that y'all are doing, going to the parks, having fun, recording, I can imagine that that's also pretty labor intensive. So what does y'all's timeline look like for this project?
So originally, I thought that we'd be able to do this in 2 years. So we don't plan to visit all 400 and some odd parks, including units and seashores and things like that. We're doing the big 63 national parks. So I originally thought we would be able to do it in 2 years. I think the timeline is going to be stretched out a little bit longer than that. But so far, we've been able to do at least one park a month. So how we do it is when we visit the parks, we take all of our videos, we write a recap of what we did and what we experienced there, kind of in a blog form. And then we upload our videos, and we actually work with the Sierra Club to get an episode like the one that you saw in the beginning of this live stream. So they help us out a lot with sharing their team with us. So I'd say it probably takes about 1 month from when we do a trip to get an episode out.
Yet, unlike Willow, we do a lot of winging it. And there is less, we have a semblance of a plan, but when you're going to parks and the trails are closed and the weather has turned and things are happening, the plan gets tossed out the window more times than not. And we have to be really flexible about, what we choose to do and how we capture things. Like we went to Shenandoah and went to a cave, and it was just too dark in there to record anything. So unfortunately, people don't see the cave, but they see our reflection outside of it, when we would have loved to have, shown a bit of the cave. So there's a lot of, just finesse and going with the flow when we're traveling and recording.
Yeah, I can imagine that there are a lot of unexpected things that happen while y'all are recording, or even Willow while you're developing the story and the podcast. Are there any other fun experiences or interesting experiences that y'all have had in being like, okay, well, that didn't work. We got to transition to this. Or, okay, the whole thing didn't work. We're going to scrap the whole thing and we're going to do another park or something like that.
We had an experience when we went to, I think it was New River Gorge, where we were supposed to travel on a certain date, but it ended up being like a crazy storm. And we couldn't go on the day that we wanted to. We were thinking like, oh, we might have to. So that was our first trip. So in December, we were thinking we might have to like scrap the trip like altogether. But it turned out that we were staying in an Airbnb, and the Airbnb host was so like welcoming and accommodating to us. She was like, "Oh yeah, I'll just move your reservation up 2 days. Like, I'm not going to charge you. It's no problem because there's nobody else staying there this weekend." So that was great. And then we also had a tour planned, and we told them that was the bridge catwalk that Diamond talked about in the video. We also had that tour plan, and we're like, hey, we're not going to be able to get here at this time because of this reason. And they were like, oh yeah, no problem. We'll just like move it to this other time on this other day. So that's something that I've loved about being in the outdoors, that everything is just very flexible, very accommodating, very go with the flow. So even though things like that might come up, we still find a way to make it work.
Yeah, I don't know if I have great stories about things that have gone awry. I mean, there are always little things that go awry in the production process. But I've been doing this long enough that I sort of expect them by now. I think, but going back to what you were talking about in terms of sort of things that are unexpected in the process, I think one of the things that was a surprise to me early on. So I've been doing Out There for 8 years now, so it's been a while, and one of the things that became clear quite quickly is that, and I don't know exactly why this is, but I would say 90% of the story pitches that I get are from women, and that's really interesting to me. I think it's great because, outdoor media has traditionally been rather male dominated. That's changing, obviously, but but and I mean, I think maybe it's just because I'm female, and so people see this as like, okay, this is a place where women can tell their stories. And then once once you sort of have become a place where we tell a lot of stories about women, people feel comfortable pitching those stories. But it's just been really interesting that kind of happened organically. I didn't really have to work at that. The flip side of it, of course, is that, if this is what's going on, where like you attract stories from people who are like you, if that's really the phenomenon that we're experiencing here, so that's great that we're making space, that that makes space for for women to tell their stories. But I also have to then be conscious of, okay, well, also a large majority of the stories that get pitched to me are from white people. And so why is that? Well, probably because I'm white, right? Like this is probably what's going on here. So then I have to very consciously say, okay, I need to make an effort and be proactive to reach out and not just open the door to stories from people of color, but also to invite them in and to say, look, I want these stories, and to reach out to specific individuals and say, do you want to pitch us something? Like I'd love to hear your story ideas. And so that's been something that I've worked very intentionally on, because I think if you do just sort of sit back and wait for things to come to you, you attract people who are very much like you generally. Like that's just sort of how it works. So that's been an interesting phenomenon, and one that I've worked to be really intentional about.
Mm-hmm. So we have a few questions from the audience, and just thinking back a few weeks, so Sierra Club recently hosted the Outdoor Alliance for Kids Advocacy Week. And Kristen, you were on our Emerging Leaders panel. And Willow, I know this year you launched a kids podcast, Once Upon a Meadow. So this is partially a question from Sid Atwood, but are youth among your target audience, and are they, or how are they getting engaged in y'all's projects?
So we haven't had any national park trips with any kids. But like you mentioned, I did speak to a group of kids a couple weeks ago at the Outdoor Alliance for Kids conference. So I think planning to take kids along with us on a national park trip will involve a lot more funding and a lot more planning. So we have an initiative that we're planning for next year at Assateague National Seashore, that we're working to like gather our ideas and kind of plan to generate more funding. So immediately this year, maybe not anything with kids unless we do maybe like, I don't know, a small group hike or something like around the Baltimore area. But like involving children will come with a lot more planning. So potentially next year.
So for us, yeah, like you said, Chris, we did just launch a second podcast this year that is specifically for kids. So Out There is really just for adults. Like I mean, I know some people listen with their kids, but also there are some pretty sort of grown-up topics that we cover. So so I'm not sure, how appropriate it is for little ones. But we did just launch this show called Once Upon a Meadow, it's a fiction podcast. But the characters are all wild animals who live out in a meadow, and wild animals and plants the trees can talk to. And so they basically they have to find ways to work together so that, the whole community can flourish, even though everybody's got, different priorities and whatnot. And it's all set to original music. So I don't know whether people in the audience maybe listened to Peter and the Wolf as a kid, but it's sort of like that, where each character kind of has its own musical motif and the music kind of helps drive the story. And so that's been so we produced our first season of that this spring. And it's been a lot of fun. I don't yet know what the future of that will be. We're meeting about that next week to to kind of discuss that, but it is really fun, and I think there's a real appetite for thoughtful, introspective stories for kids that really get children thinking about bigger questions and get them thinking about the environment and get them thinking about their role in the natural world and what that can look like, and their role in community, and and sort of like exploring themes of environmental and social justice, but at an age appropriate level, so that we've got like bear singing a song about this, or the squirrels like chittering about it, and it's not all big and heavy, but we're still sort of tackling those themes. I think there's a lot of interest in that. So I'm hoping we can do more with that down the road.
I would say that outside of my work with Our Parks 2, one of my big projects that I'm also doing right now is called the Weeds to Woods program. And it's a workforce development program for youth starting at age 15. And so my ministry is more of the young adult segment of youth. And I really love offering them opportunities to explore career paths in this space. And I'm hoping that, as we get more funding and develop our programmatic plan for Our Parks 2 in the coming years, it could be a through line that I can, not only have my youth, in this more academic setting, but also integrate them into, the wild and apply those lessons into a real-time adventure.
That is actually a great segue to the next question from the audience from Walter. So this is for Kristen and Diamond. How do you cover the cost of travel to all the national parks? And Walter says, I know that Out There can cover some of their costs through advertising, but what does that look like for y'all?
So we are not currently a 501c3 organization, but we have a fiscal sponsorship with Soul Track Outdoors, and we actually received Sea grant funding for our project. So that is how we've been managing our trips, but also it's only a finite amount of money that we have. So we have been focused on visiting parks in the area that we can drive to within like I guess 12 to 14 hours. So that's how we've been getting to our parks so far. Once we have 501c3 status, and we'll officially have the mechanism to accept like grant funding and things like that.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. It looks like we are going to wrap up here. Last question for y'all. Any sort of insight on the next national park that you're going to go to, or the upcoming podcast? Any sneak peeks for our audience?
So Diamond will be on break for a little while. So while Diamond is on break, we're kind of going to pivot to Our Parks 2 and Friends. So I'll be taking my family members along, taking my friends along with me to different parks. So she has already visited Joshua Tree and Death Valley National Park, along with a couple others. But while she's on break, I'm going to try to get to Joshua Tree and Death Valley because I have some friends who live in the area. So I'm going to meet up with them and explore those parks. And you guys can follow along with us on our social media platforms.
Yes, I'm currently 8.5 months pregnant, and this baby is coming very soon. So while I'm on maternity leave, we have, and that's to your point about like unexpected things. This was very much an unexpected thing to happen at the start of this project. And we've been able to just, reconfigure our plan for this first year. But as I get out of maternity leave, I'm hoping to have my little baby like on the trails with me, exploring his first national park. So some like baby content maybe in the future.
And for us, so our next episode, which comes out in 2 weeks, is we're actually going to Finland. I mean, I'm not personally going to Finland, but that's where the story takes place. And looking at this, so apparently in Finland, people go, so like, I feel like here in this country, lots of people go swimming in the summer. This is a thing we do. In Finland, they go swimming in the winter in the ice. Like they will chop a hole into the sea and like do this. And everyone does this. This is like grannies will be like out doing this, right? This is not just hardcore adventure. This is just like a thing that you do. And so we have this sort of wonderful story about this woman who starts doing it. And it's a story that also goes into, the effect that this had on some mental health issues that she was going through and whatnot. But it's I think it's going to be a really lovely piece.
Oh, that's great. And well, congrats, Diamond, and best of luck to you in the next few weeks. And Willow, when's that podcast going to drop, do you think? The next couple months?
That'll be in 2 weeks. So that'll be June 15th.
Okay, great. Okay, I actually think we have one more or two more audience questions. So this is for Willow. How do you balance the gravity of some of your messages with making the content entertaining and engaging?
I don't know if entertaining is really my goal. I mean, I think some of our stories are entertaining. Maybe all of them are entertaining, but I think of entertainment as more like, I don't know, like this is fun. And I'm not sure that our stories are always fun. I think they're more, I see our role as being more comforting than entertaining, and as inviting introspection. So how do you balance the gravity of stuff? Because yeah, we do take on some pretty heavy topics. I mean, we had a story just earlier this season about climate anxiety, and like the main character in this story like basically almost kills himself because of how how anxious he is about the state of the environment, and things like that. I think that to me, the way to handle these topics is just to get to be really personal in the stories. Because a lot of the time, I mean, certainly what we hear in the news all the time is sort of like up at this level where we're hearing about policy stuff, and we're hearing about, maybe scientific studies or whatnot. But that doesn't really tell you about the human side of it. And so to me, if you can bring things down, like break things down into very universal feelings and emotions and thought processes, that makes these kinds of topics accessible and digestible for people, because maybe somebody hasn't been in the exact, like maybe they haven't experienced exactly what our character in the story is talking about. Maybe they've never gotten lost in the desert. Maybe they've never climbed Mount Everest, whatever. Most of us haven't. But I bet they've had a point in their lives where they've felt a little bit lost and a little bit directionless about where they're going. I bet they've had a point where they felt hurt by something. I bet they've had a point where they're considering, they're weighing options and wondering how to make a moral decision where different parts of them are sort of at odds with each other. And so by really making these stories deeply personal and kind of bringing things to that level, again, I don't know that makes the stories entertaining, but it certainly makes them engaging, and I think it makes them relatable and accessible to to a wide variety of listeners, whether or not they can relate to the exact thing that the story is talking about.
Thanks, Willow. All right. So I have one more question, and I think this will wrap us up for our time together. And the question is, why the outdoors? And I'd love to expand a little bit on that question about what, just to wrap up this whole live stream, what drew y'all to the outdoors, and what does it provide for your body and for your life?
For me, I feel like spending time in the outdoors, like the greatest benefit for me is the mental health aspect. When I'm outside, like I feel solace, I feel peace, I feel just like, I don't know, the blood in my veins is just like cleansing me from like the sun, and like sitting by the water is just so peaceful and calming. And so I just really feel like it's a huge mental health boost for me to spend time outside.
I would say that for me, my relationship with nature just began with, my pure curiosity about what was happening around me and why. And going to school for environmental science helped answer those questions. And then as I got older and the adult life became more real, I turned to nature as also a place of refuge. And as a student, I think nature is really great at teaching us how to live life, how to live a balanced life. And by observing the birds and observing the seasons and being in tune with how things work in nature has been a guiding force in how I live. I was inspired to go and travel and live in Mexico for 6 months because of the fall bird migration. I said, well, they're going, I'm going too. And so I really take the lessons of nature maybe to an extreme, but that's my why, because it's like very wise.
So I actually, my whole reason for doing Out There is very wrapped up in this. So like I said earlier, I had been working as a reporter for Wyoming Public Radio, and this was like where I thought my career was supposed to go. I had gone to grad school for journalism. I had, studied broadcast journalism. I wanted to work in public radio, all of that. And then, and so I did that for a while, and it was a great job in a lot of ways, but it was one of those things where I didn't love it quite enough to make it worth the amount of stress that it was. And everyone would always ask me, well, what would you rather be doing? And I said, well, if I knew that, I would already be doing it. This is like, I'm not just sitting here for no reason. But I just really didn't know like what would make me happier. And then at about that point, my book club read Wild by Cheryl Strayed, which at that point was brand new. At this point, everybody and their grandmother has read it. But I just remember reading this book and being like, I need to go backpacking. This is what needs to happen. And I was not a backpacker at all. Like I had never gone backpacking at this point in my life. I did day hikes. I was, but I certainly had never like done long backcountry experiences. But for some reason, this just sounded, I was like, this is what I need to do. I just need to get away from society. I'm going to do a through hike and this is what's going to happen. And so I decided to hike the Colorado Trail, which is this 500-mile trail that goes from Denver to Durango. And so it's, it's not one of the hugely, it's not as long as the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail or whatever, but it's still like a 5-week endeavor, right? This is not, insignificant. So I quit my job and went backpacking. And I remember when I told my boss I was leaving, I told him what I was doing, and he kind of stops and he looks at me and he's like, so you're leaving us to take a walk in the woods? And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much right. So, so I did that. And I think I had this idea, I don't know, it just felt like maybe this would be a way to figure it out. And I remember like shortly before I left, a friend of the family she was sort of skeptical about this. And she was like, what do you think is going to actually happen out there? Like, you're going to be on a mountaintop and the clouds are just going to part and you're going to know what you want to do with your life. Like, is that what we're going for here? And I was like, yep, that's the goal. That is in fact what I hope will happen. And that didn't happen. I mean, it turns out that like through hiking is actually really hard and kind of miserable a lot of the time. Like you have blisters and your pack is too heavy and there are mosquitoes and the weather's terrible, all these things. So I didn't really have any big epiphanies while I was out on the trail. But when I came back, it somehow, having been out there, gave me the mental space to sort of let go of the track that I thought I should be on, and gave me space to see the track that I actually wanted to be on. Because when I got back, I thought, okay, I don't want to go back to news reporting. That is not, in fact, what I want to do. But I do still want to keep telling stories with sound. And I think that, the outdoors can be really transformative to people and can really help you make sense out of your life. And so I want to harness that, and I want to tell these stories and hopefully provide some inspiration and some solace and some comfort to other people who, may not be able to quit their job and go on a 5-week trek. That's a very privileged thing to be able to do. And hopefully offer people some of the benefit, even if they can't maybe go on quite such a grand adventure.
Willow, same. I went on a 21-day backpacking trip. It was fantastic, and every day was awful. And once I got home, it set this precedent that I didn't realize had happened, that like that's the level of aliveness that I need to feel every day for this to be satisfying. And so yes, I highly recommend, if spend some time, walk in the woods, choose go camping, do something, steep yourself in nature. It's so healing, and it really, really just helps you feel what's important.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if that means finding a patch of grass outside and putting your feet on it, if it's raining, that's okay. If it's sunny, that's even better. But that'll give you the clarity that y'all are also talking about, and being able to rejuvenate your soul through nature. That's awesome. I love this. This is so great. So this is all the time we have today. Willow, Kristen, Diamond, thank you so much for being with us and taking the time to have this conversation with us. And thank you all for watching and joining us. And for more information on Kristen and Diamond, you all can go to ourparks2.org. That's TOO.org, or check them out on Instagram at ourparks2. And for more info on the Out There podcast, check out outtherepodcast.com and also on Instagram at Out There Podcast. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.